It was a Tuesday morning when Keanu Reeves walked through the glass doors of St. Mary's Children's Hospital in downtown Los Angeles. The smell of sanitizer mixed with the faint scent of crayons and paint from the activity room greeted him as he entered. This wasn't his first visit to a children's hospital, and it probably wouldn't be his last. Over the years, he'd made it a quiet habit to show up at hospitals, spend time with sick kids, and try to bring a little light into their difficult days. The hospital staff knew he was coming. They'd arranged for him to visit the pediatric wing, where children with serious illnesses spent weeks or sometimes months receiving treatment. But Keanu didn't want any big production. No cameras, no press releases, just him and the kids. That's how he always did things. A young nurse named Rachel greeted him at the elevator. She looked excited but was trying to play it cool.
"The kids are so thrilled you're here," she said, pressing the button for the 4th floor.
"Some of them have been talking about it all morning." Keanu smiled. "I hope I don't disappoint them." "Are you kidding? You're like a superhero to these kids." The elevator doors opened to a hallway decorated with colorful murals of cartoon characters and animals. Despite the cheerful decorations, there was an underlying heaviness to the place. This was where children fought battles no child should have to face. The first few rooms went smoothly. Keanu sat with a 7-year-old boy who wanted to talk about motorcycles. Then he met twin girls who made him laugh with their jokes. He signed autographs, took selfies with parents, and listened to stories. Each child had their own personality, their own way of coping with being sick. Then he came to room 447. Through the doorway, he could see a small girl sitting up in bed, her arms wrapped around her knees. She had a pink scarf tied around her head, and her skin had that pale, tired look that came from months of treatment. Unlike the other children who'd been excited and chatty, this little girl looked scared. Her mother stood by the window, and when she saw Keanu, her face lit up with hope. "Sophie, look who's here to visit you," she said gently. The girl, Sophie, looked up. She was 5 years old, though she seemed smaller than that. Her big brown eyes studied Keanu's face, but she didn't smile. She didn't reach out for a hug or ask for an autograph like the other kids had. Keanu walked slowly into the room and pulled up a chair beside her bed. He didn't tower over her or invade her space. He just sat down and spoke quietly. "Hi, Sophie. I'm Keanu. Is it okay if I sit here for a bit?" Sophie nodded slightly but didn't speak. Her mother, Lisa, apologized. "She's been really quiet lately. The doctors say it's normal with everything she's going through, but as a mom, you just worry, you know." "Of course," Keanu said. He turned back to Sophie. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. Sometimes it's nice to just have someone sit with you." They sat in silence for a moment. Lisa tried to make conversation, telling Keanu about Sophie's treatment, how she'd been diagnosed 6 months ago, how they were hoping this round of therapy would work. Keanu listened, but he kept his attention on Sophie. After a few minutes, Sophie whispered something so quietly that no one heard it at first. "What was that, sweetie?" Lisa asked, leaning closer, but Sophie wasn't looking at her mother. She was looking directly at Keanu. Her small hand reached out and tugged on his sleeve. When he leaned down, she motioned for him to come closer, like she wanted to tell him a secret. Keanu glanced at Lisa, who nodded with a confused smile. He leaned in, turning his ear toward Sophie's mouth. What happened next would change everything. Sophie cupped her tiny hand around Keanu's ear and whispered something that made his entire body go rigid. His eyes widened. The friendly, relaxed expression he'd worn since entering the room completely vanished. For several seconds, he didn't move. He just stayed there, bent over, as if he couldn't quite process what he'd just heard. Lisa noticed immediately. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice rising with concern. Keanu slowly pulled back and looked at Sophie. The little girl's eyes were filled with tears now, but also with something else. Relief, maybe. Like she'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. "Sophie," Keanu said carefully, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is that true? Are you sure?" Sophie nodded, one small tear rolling down her cheek. Lisa moved closer. "What did she say?" "Keanu, what's wrong?" Keanu stood up, running his hand through his hair. His mind was racing, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't alarm Lisa, not yet, not until he knew more. But the look on his face betrayed his distress. "Sophie just told me something," he began, choosing his words carefully. "Something I think we need to take seriously." "What?" What did she say? Lisa's voice was getting frantic now. Keanu looked at Sophie again. Can I tell your mom what you told me? Sophie hesitated, then shook her head quickly, fear flashing across her face. Okay, Keanu said softly. Okay, I won't, not right now. He turned to Lisa. Can I talk to you outside for just a minute? In the hallway, Lisa was nearly in tears. You're scaring me. What did my daughter say to you? Keanu took a deep breath. He knew he had to be careful here. She told me something about the hospital, about someone who visits at night. He paused, watching Lisa's reaction. Has Sophie mentioned anything to you about being scared at night? About someone coming into her room? Lisa's face showed confusion mixed with worry. She's had nightmares. I thought it was just because of everything she's going through. Kids in hospitals have bad dreams. The doctor said it was normal. What kind of nightmares? She says a man in a white coat comes when she's sleeping. But there are always doctors and nurses coming in and out. I just assumed she was mixing up reality with dreams. Keanu felt his chest tighten. Has she said anything else about this man? Lisa thought for a moment. A few weeks ago, she told me he gives her special medicine that makes her feel funny. But I checked with her doctors. They said all her medications are given during normal rounds. I figured she was confused. She grabbed Keanu's arm. What exactly did she tell you? Keanu looked back toward Sophie's room. Through the doorway, he could see the little girl watching them, her eyes wide and afraid. She told me that the man isn't really a doctor, Keanu said quietly. She said he hurts the children when they're sleeping. And she said he told them if they ever told anyone, something bad would happen to their families. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. I need you to stay calm, Keanu said, though his own heart was pounding. I need to ask you something. Has Sophie seemed worse lately? Have the doctors mentioned anything unusual about her condition? Yes, Lisa said, her voice breaking. They can't figure out why she's not responding to treatment like she should. They ran extra tests last week. They said something about unexpected toxicity in her system, but they assumed it was just a reaction to the chemotherapy. Keanu felt a cold dread settle over him. This was real. This wasn't a child's imagination or a nightmare. Something was happening in this hospital, something terrible, and a 5-year-old girl had just trusted him with the truth. He pulled out his phone. I need to make some calls. I have a friend who used to work in law enforcement, someone who can look into this quietly without causing panic. He looked at Lisa. I'm going to figure out what's happening here. I promise you, Lisa was crying now. Why would she tell you and not me? Maybe she was protecting you, Keanu said gently. She's a brave little girl, and she's right to be scared, but she's not alone anymore. We're going to help her. As he walked down the hallway to make his calls, Keanu looked back one more time. Sophie was still watching him from her bed, and for the first time since he'd entered her room, he saw the smallest hint of hope on her face. She had spoken. Someone had listened. And now, whether he was ready for it or not, Keanu Reeves was about to uncover something that would shake this hospital to its core. Keanu couldn't sleep that night. He kept seeing Sophie's face, those big brown eyes filled with fear and something else. Something that looked like relief that someone finally believed her. He sat in his living room, the city lights of Los Angeles glowing through the windows, his phone in his hand. At 2 a.m, he finally made the call. Do you have any idea what time it is? The voice on the other end was groggy but alert enough to sound annoyed. David, I need your help, Keanu said. It's important. David Chen had been a detective with the LAPD for 15 years before retiring early to start his own private investigation firm. He and Keanu had met years ago at a charity event, and they'd stayed friends. David was one of the few people Keanu trusted completely. What's going on? David's tone shifted from annoyed to concerned. Keanu told him everything. About the hospital visit, about Sophie, about what she'd whispered in his ear. He told him about Lisa's mention of nightmares, about the unexplained toxicity in Sophie's system, about how the little girl was terrified to tell her own mother. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Keanu, David finally said, kids in hospitals, especially really sick kids, they sometimes have vivid nightmares. The medications, the stress, the fear, it all mixes together in their minds. Are you sure this isn't just, I know what you're going to say, Keanu interrupted, but you didn't see her face. You didn't hear the way she said it. She gave me specific details, David. She said the man comes between 2 and 3 in the morning, always when it's quiet. She said he wears a white coat but no name badge. She said he brings medicine that makes them too sleepy to remember things clearly. David was quiet again, but Keanu could hear him moving around now, probably getting out of bed. Those are pretty specific details for a 5-year-old to make up. Exactly. Okay, David said. Okay, let me look into it. But quietly. If this is real, we can't spook whoever it is. And if it's not, we can't cause panic or accuse innocent hospital staff. Give me a couple of days. Thank you, Keanu said, feeling some of the weight lift from his chest. Don't thank me yet. I might come back with nothing. But David didn't come back with nothing. 3 days later, they met at a small coffee shop in Santa Monica, far from the hospital, and away from anywhere Keanu might be recognized. David had a folder with him, and the expression on his face told Keanu everything he needed to know before they even started talking. You're not going to like this, David said, sliding into the booth across from him. Tell me. David opened the folder. I started by calling in some favors, talking to people I know who work in hospital administration and pediatric care. I asked general questions, nothing specific, just feeling things out. He pulled out a sheet of paper covered in notes. 3 other families have made complaints over the past year. All from the same ward where Sophie is staying. Keanu felt his stomach drop. What kind of complaints? Similar to what you described. Kids talking about nighttime visits, about being scared, about bad dreams that feel real. But here's the thing. Every single complaint was dismissed. The hospital counselor evaluated the children and determined they were experiencing trauma responses to their medical treatment. Nightmares, confusion, anxiety, all normal for kids in their situation. But what if it wasn't normal? Keanu asked, his voice tight. That's what I thought too. David pulled out another document. So I dug deeper. I looked at the pediatric oncology ward's records, the publicly available data about patient outcomes. He paused, and Keanu could see he was choosing his words carefully. In the past 18 months, 6 children in that ward have died unexpectedly, not from their primary illness, but from complications that the doctors couldn't fully explain. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too crowded, even though there were only a handful of people there. 6 children, Keanu repeated. 6 children who were supposed to recover or at least had a fighting chance. Instead, they developed sudden complications. Organ failure, seizures, cardiac arrest. The hospital called them tragic but not suspicious. These are sick kids after all. Sometimes things go wrong. But you think something else is going on? David leaned forward. I think the statistical probability of 6 unexpected deaths in 18 months in a ward that size is higher than normal. Not by a huge amount, but enough to raise questions. Questions that apparently nobody asked. Keanu ran his hand over his face. So what do? We go to the police, right? With what evidence? David asked. A 5-year-old statement? Some statistics that could be explained away? Hospital records that show unfortunate but not necessarily criminal outcomes? Any lawyer would tear that apart in 5 minutes. So we do nothing? We just let this continue? I didn't say that. David pulled out a photograph from his folder. It showed a man in his late 30s, average height, brown hair, unremarkable in every way. This is Robert Dalton. He's a medical supply technician, contracted through an outside company. He's been working at St. Mary's for about 2 years. A technician? Not a doctor? Not a doctor, not a nurse. But his job gives him access to the entire hospital, including the medication storage areas and patient rooms. He works the night shift, usually from midnight to 8 in the morning. Keanu stared at the photo. You think it's him? I think he's worth looking at, David said carefully. I cross-referenced his shift schedule with the dates of the children's deaths. He was working every single night that those kids took their final turn for the worse. He was also working the nights when those families made complaints about their children being scared. That can't be a coincidence. Maybe not, but it's still not proof. David pulled out one more document. Here's where it gets interesting. Before St. Mary's, Dalton worked at a children's hospital in Portland. That hospital closed its pediatric wing 3 years ago, citing budget issues and restructuring. But I made some calls to people who worked there. Off the record, they told me there were concerns about irregularities in the ward, unexplained patient complications, but nothing was ever proven. The hospital just quietly shut down that department and let Dalton's contract expire. And then he came here, Keanu said, feeling sick. And then he came here, David confirmed. Look, I could be completely wrong. This could all be coincidence and unfortunate timing, but my gut tells me something isn't right. Keanu looked at the photo again. Robert Dalton. An ordinary-looking man with an extraordinary ability to access vulnerable children when no one was watching. We need evidence, he said. Real evidence, David agreed. The kind that holds up in court. And we need it without putting any more children at risk. How do we get it? David closed the folder and looked at Keanu with an expression that was part concern, part resignation. I've been thinking about that. The hospital has security cameras in the hallways, but not in patient rooms for privacy reasons. If Dalton is doing something, he's doing it where there are no cameras. So we put cameras where he can't see them, Keanu said. That's illegal without consent. I don't care. You should care. If we get evidence illegally, it can't be used in court. He walks free and we've accomplished nothing except warning him that someone's onto him. Keanu felt frustration building in his chest. So what's your plan? David was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised him. We need someone inside. Someone who can be in that hospital late at night, who has a legitimate reason to be there, who can watch without being obvious. You want me to stake out a hospital? Keanu asked. I want you to think about whether you're willing to take this that far, David said seriously. Because once we start down this road, there's no going back. If you're wrong, you could ruin an innocent person's life and get yourself sued into oblivion. If you're right, you're going to uncover something that will haunt you forever. Keanu thought about Sophie again, her small hand tugging on his sleeve. Her whispered secret. The way she'd looked at him with hope after spending months being afraid. That little girl trusted me, he said quietly. She could have stayed silent. She could have been too scared to say anything. But she looked at me and decided to take a chance. How can I do any less? David nodded slowly. I was hoping you'd say that, because I already have an idea. Over the next hour, they planned everything out. Keanu would reach out to the hospital's administration and offer to do a documentary about children's health care, about the incredible work that hospitals like St. Mary's do for sick kids. He'd use his celebrity status to get access, claim he wanted to film at different times of day and night to show what round-the-clock care really looked like. You think they'll go for it? Keanu asked. Are you kidding? Free publicity from a Hollywood star? They'll jump at it. And it gives you a legitimate reason to be there at 2 a.m. with cameras. What about Dalton? Won't he be suspicious? Maybe. But he can't do anything about it without drawing attention to himself. And if he backs off, if he stops whatever he's doing because he knows someone's watching, then at least the kids are safe. And if he doesn't back off? David's expression was grim. Then we catch him in the act. 2 days later, Keanu was back at St. Mary's Children's Hospital, this time with a small film crew, and a letter from the hospital administrator giving him full access to the facility. The staff was excited, the parents were honored, and the children were thrilled to see him again. Sophie was still in room 447. When Keanu walked in, her face lit up in a way it hadn't during his first visit. Lisa was there too, and she grabbed his hand. Thank you for coming back, she said. It means so much to her. Keanu knelt beside Sophie's bed. I promised I'd help, he said quietly so only she could hear. And I keep my promises. That night at 11:30, Keanu returned to the hospital with David and a minimal crew. They set up in an empty consultation room with a view of the hallway leading to the pediatric ward. Hidden cameras, motion sensors, everything they needed to monitor who came and went. And then they waited. At 2:47 in the morning, a figure in a white coat walked down the hallway, carrying a small black medical bag. The cameras caught everything. The man looked around carefully, checking to make sure he was alone. Then he headed straight for Sophie's room. Keanu's heart hammered in his chest. David put a hand on his shoulder. Wait, he whispered. We need to see what he does. But Keanu was already moving, because in that moment, he didn't care about evidence or court cases or following the rules. All he cared about was that a 5-year-old girl had asked him for help, and he wasn't going to let her down. He stepped out into the hallway, his voice calm but firm. Working late tonight? The man in the white coat froze, his hand on the door handle to Sophie's room. When he turned around, Keanu saw his face clearly for the first time. It was Robert Dalton, and the look in his eyes was pure calculation, the look of someone who'd just been caught. The hallway was deadly quiet except for the soft hum of medical equipment and the distant beep of monitors. Robert Dalton stood frozen, his hand still on the door handle to Sophie's room. His eyes darted from Keanu to the black medical bag he was carrying, then back to Keanu's face. "Mr. Reeves," Dalton said, his voice surprisingly calm. "I didn't expect to see anyone up here at this hour." Keanu took a step closer, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "I could say the same about you. What are you doing at Sophie's room?" Dalton's expression shifted into something that almost looked friendly, almost looked innocent. "Just doing my job. I'm with Medical Supply Services. Sometimes we have to restock medications during off hours to avoid disrupting daytime care. At 3 in the morning, the hospital runs 24 hours a day, Mr. Reeves. Someone has to keep things running while everyone else sleeps." Dalton adjusted his grip on the bag. "I really should get back to work. Lots of rounds to make." He started to turn away, but Keanu moved to block his path. It wasn't threatening, not yet, but it was clear he wasn't going to let Dalton just walk away. "That's a pretty small bag for restocking supplies," Keanu said, his eyes fixed on the black case. "What's in it?" For the first time, something flickered across Dalton's face. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation? "Medical supplies. Like I said. Now, if you'll excuse me." "Show me." The words hung in the air between them. Dalton's jaw tightened. "I don't have to show you anything. You're not hospital staff and you're not security. You're just an actor who happens to be filming a documentary. Then you won't mind if I call security and ask them to verify what you're carrying," Keanu said, pulling out his phone. That's when things happened fast. Dalton's expression changed completely, the friendly mask dropping away to reveal something cold and angry underneath. He took a step toward Keanu, and for a moment Keanu thought he might actually try to push past him or worse. But then David appeared at the end of the hallway, his phone already pressed to his ear. "Security is on the way," he called out. "I've also got the police on the line. They're very interested in talking to you, Mr. Dalton." Dalton looked between them, and Keanu could see him weighing his options. Run, fight, try to talk his way out of it. The hallway had exits at both ends, but David was blocking one and Keanu was blocking the path to Sophie's room. "This is ridiculous," Dalton said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Then open the bag," Keanu said quietly. Before Dalton could respond, the elevator dinged at the far end of the hall. 2 security guards stepped out, followed closely by a police officer who must have been doing rounds in the hospital. Dalton's face went pale. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, his hand instinctively moving to his belt. David stepped forward, showing his old police ID. "David Chen, private investigator." This man was attempting to enter a patient's room at 3 in the morning, carrying an unauthorized medical bag. "We have reason to believe he may be involved in patient endangerment." "That's insane," Dalton said, but his voice was shaking now. "I work here. I have every right to be here." The officer looked at Dalton, then at the bag. "Sir, I'm going to need you to set that bag down and step away from it." "You can't do this. You need a warrant. I need probable cause, which I have if hospital security believes you're acting suspiciously. Set the bag down. Now." For a moment, Keanu thought Dalton might actually run. His whole body was tense, like a spring about to snap. But he was surrounded now with no clear path out. Slowly, reluctantly, he set the black bag on the floor. The officer picked it up carefully, set it on a nearby rolling table, and opened it. What he found inside made everyone in the hallway go silent. Syringes. At least a dozen of them already filled with some kind of clear liquid. Small glass vials with handwritten labels. A notebook with dates and room numbers scribbled in messy handwriting. And at the bottom of the bag, a small digital camera. "What is this?" the officer asked, his voice hard now. Dalton didn't answer. He was staring at the bag like he couldn't believe what was happening, like his carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. David moved closer and looked at one of the vials. His face went white. "These aren't standard hospital medications," he said. "This label says it's a sedative, but the dosage is way too high for pediatric use." The officer immediately called for backup. Within minutes, the hallway was filled with more police, hospital administrators, and medical staff. Dalton was handcuffed and read his rights. He didn't say a word, just stared at the floor with dead eyes. Keanu felt like he might collapse. His legs were shaking, his hands were trembling. David grabbed his arm to steady him. "You did it," David said quietly. "You caught him." But Keanu didn't feel victorious. He felt sick. Because if they were right, if Dalton had been doing what they suspected, then they'd stopped him tonight. But how many nights had he already gotten away with it? How many children had already been hurt? A doctor arrived to examine the contents of the bag more carefully. She was the head of the pediatric department, Dr. Patricia Vance, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She looked at the syringes, then at the notebook, and her face transformed from curiosity to horror. "These dates," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "These correspond to patient complications we've had. Children who suddenly got worse for no clear medical reason." She flipped through more pages. "And these room numbers, these are all from our ward." One of the administrators, a nervous man named Mr. Harrison, looked like he might be sick. "Dr. Vance, are you saying—" "I'm saying we need to test every medication in this bag immediately, and we need to review the medical files of every patient who had contact with this man." She looked at Dalton with pure fury in her eyes. "What did you do to these children?" Dalton finally looked up, and for just a second, Keanu saw something in his expression that made his blood run cold. It wasn't remorse or fear or guilt. It was resentment, like he was angry at being caught rather than sorry for what he'd done. The police led him away, and the hallway slowly began to clear. But the real work was just beginning. Over the next few hours, as the sun started to rise over Los Angeles, the hospital became a crime scene. Detectives arrived. Evidence technicians photographed everything. The contents of Dalton's bag were carefully cataloged and sent to a lab for testing. Keanu stayed. He couldn't leave, not yet. He sat in a waiting area while police interviewed David about the investigation, while hospital staff scrambled to check on every child in the ward, while parents were gently woken up and told that something serious had happened. Lisa found him around 6 in the morning. Her eyes were red from crying, but she wasn't falling apart. She was angry. "They told me what he had in that bag," she said, sitting down beside Keanu. "They told me he was coming to Sophie's room." "I'm so sorry," Keanu said. "Don't apologize. You saved her. That police officer said if you hadn't been here tonight, if you hadn't stopped him." Her voice broke. "I don't want to think about what might have happened." "How is Sophie?" "Scared, confused, but safe. The doctors are running tests to make sure she doesn't have anything in her system that shouldn't be there." Lisa wiped her eyes. "She told me what she whispered to you that first day. She told me everything she was too afraid to tell me before." Keanu felt his throat tighten. "She said she tried to tell me once, but I didn't believe her. I thought she was just having nightmares. I feel like the worst mother in the world." "You're not," Keanu said firmly. "You had no way of knowing. None of us did. That's how people like Dalton get away with things. They hide in plain sight and they count on no one believing the victims." Dr. Vance appeared in the doorway looking exhausted. "We've completed preliminary tests on the medications in that bag," she said. "They're contaminated, mixed with substances that would cause severe reactions in children, especially children who are already medically fragile." "What kind of substances?" David asked. He'd finished with the police and had joined them in the waiting area. "Overdoses of sedatives mixed with compounds that would trigger organ stress. In small doses, it might just make a child sick. In larger doses or repeated doses—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "How many children?" Lisa asked, her voice hollow. Dr. Vance looked at her clipboard. "We're reviewing files now, but based on the dates in his notebook, we believe at least 8 children were targeted over the past 18 months. 6 of them didn't survive." The number hung in the air like a weight. 6 children, 6 families destroyed, 6 lives stolen by someone who was supposed to be part of the team keeping them safe. "What happens now?" Keanu asked. "Now we build a case," said Detective Rodriguez, who'd been leading the investigation. He was a stocky man with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. "We're getting warrants to search Dalton's home, his car, his previous workplaces. We're interviewing everyone who worked with him, and we're reaching out to the hospital in Portland where he worked before." "You think he did this there too?" David asked. "I think we're going to find that this goes back further than any of us want to imagine," the detective said grimly. As the morning wore on, more details emerged. The notebook in Dalton's bag contained detailed notes about each child he'd targeted, their medication schedules when nurses made their rounds, when parents typically left for the night. He'd been planning his visits carefully, methodically, like someone who'd done this many times before. The camera in his bag was the worst discovery. When police examined it, they found photos. Not of abuse, thankfully, but of children sleeping. Dozens of photos from different hospital rooms, different children. all taken in the dead of night when no one was watching. It was evidence of a pattern, of a predator who'd found the perfect hunting ground, a place where vulnerable children were isolated, where their complaints would be dismissed as trauma or medication side effects, where he had legitimate access and a convenient cover. Keanu finally left the hospital around noon, but only because David practically dragged him out. "You need to rest," David said. "You've been up for over 30 hours. How can I rest?" Keanu asked. "How can any of us rest knowing what was happening? By remembering that it's over now." You stopped him. "Those kids are safe because you listened to Sophie when no one else did." But as they walked to the parking lot, past news vans that had already started to gather, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Because now they had to figure out how someone like Robert Dalton had been able to operate in plain sight for so long. And more importantly, they had to make sure it never happened again. 1 year later, the 4th floor of St. Mary's Children's Hospital looked completely different. The walls had been repainted in brighter colors. New artwork from patients covered the hallways. Security badges with photos were required for everyone, no exceptions. And most importantly, there was a small button installed beside every child's bed, a direct line to security that any patient could press if they felt unsafe. The button was Sophie's idea. She'd told the hospital administrators during a safety review meeting that kids needed a way to call for help that didn't depend on whether adults believed them or not. "Sometimes grown-ups don't listen," she'd said simply. "Kids need their own button," so they installed the buttons. Every pediatric hospital in California followed St. Mary's example within months. Then hospitals across the country started doing the same. One small voice had started a wave of change. Sophie was 8 years old now, and she'd been cancer-free for 10 months. The doctors called it a miracle, but Lisa knew better. Once Dalton's poisoning had stopped, once Sophie received the proper treatment without interference, her body had finally been able to heal. She still had checkups every 3 months, still got nervous before each scan, but she was alive and healthy and full of the energy that every 8-year-old should have. Today was a special day. Sophie was going to speak at the first annual Sophie's Voice Foundation conference, an event bringing together hospital administrators, child safety advocates, medical professionals, and families from across the country. Over 500 people had registered to attend. Keanu stood backstage at the convention center, watching Sophie practice her speech with her mother. She wasn't nervous, which amazed him. This tiny girl who'd been so scared a year ago was now preparing to speak in front of hundreds of people about the worst experience of her life. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to," he'd told her that morning. "No one will be upset if you change your mind." Sophie had looked at him with those same serious eyes she'd had in the hospital. "I want to do it," she said. "Other kids need to know it's okay to tell the truth, even when it's scary." David appeared beside Keanu, holding a folder thick with papers. "You should see these," he said, handing it over. "Applications for the Foundation's grant program. 347 hospitals want funding to improve their child safety protocols." Keanu flipped through the pages. Hospitals from every state, from big cities and small towns, all asking for help to protect their youngest patients. "Can we fund them all?" "Not all at once, but over the next 3 years, if donations keep coming in at the current rate, we can help most of them." David smiled. "You started something important here." "Sophie started it," Keanu corrected. "I just listened." The conference began with a video montage of the children who'd been affected by what happened at St. Mary's. Not just the victims, but all the children who were now safer because of the changes that had been made. Kids smiling, playing, getting treatment in hospitals that had implemented new security measures. It was a reminder that while the story had begun with tragedy, it was ending with hope. Detective Rodriguez spoke first, explaining how the investigation had uncovered similar cases at Dalton's previous hospitals. 7 more victims had been identified, bringing the total to 13 children who'd been murdered and 16 who'd been harmed but survived. It was a staggering number, made even worse by the fact that it could have been stopped years earlier if anyone had been paying attention. "But now we are paying attention," Rodriguez said, concluding his speech, "because of one brave little girl and one man who chose to believe her. We've changed how we protect children in medical settings forever." Then it was time for the families to speak. Mrs. Johnson went first, talking about Amy and the Foundation's mission to honor her memory. Other parents followed, some crying, some angry, All of them united in their determination to make sure no other family had to go through what they'd experienced. When Sophie walked onto the stage, the entire room stood up and applauded. She looked so small standing at the podium, even with the step stool they'd provided so she could reach the microphone. But when she started speaking, her voice filled the room. My name is Sophie, and I'm 8 years old. 3 years ago, I got very sick. The doctors said I had cancer, and I had to stay in the hospital for a long time. I was scared because being sick is scary, and hospitals can be scary places when you're a kid. She paused, looking out at the audience. Keanu could see her hands gripping the sides of the podium, but her voice stayed steady. But then something happened that was even scarier than being sick. A man started coming to my room at night when everyone was sleeping. He told me he was helping me, but he wasn't. He was giving me medicine that made me feel worse, and he told me that if I told anyone, bad things would happen to my family. The room was completely silent. You could hear people breathing, but nobody moved. I was really scared. I didn't know what to do. I tried to tell my mom once, but I didn't know how to explain it. And I thought maybe the adults wouldn't believe me because I was just a kid, and he was a grown-up who worked at the hospital. Sophie looked over at Keanu, who was standing in the wings. But then Mr. Reeves came to visit. And I don't know why, but something told me I should tell him. Maybe because he seemed like someone who listens. So I whispered my secret to him. And you know what he did? She paused for effect, and a small smile crossed her face. He believed me. He didn't say I was imagining things. He didn't say it was just a bad dream. He believed me, and then he did something about it. The audience started applauding again, but Sophie held up her hand. She wasn't finished. I'm talking to you today because I want every kid to know something important. If something bad is happening to you, tell someone. Tell a parent, tell a teacher, tell a doctor, tell anyone who will listen. And if the first person doesn't believe you, tell someone else. Keep telling until someone listens. Her voice got stronger, more passionate, and I'm talking to all the grown-ups here too. When a kid tells you something is wrong, believe them. Don't ignore them because they're young. Don't dismiss them because it seems impossible. Just believe them and help them. That's what Mr. Reeves did for me, and that's why I'm here today. The applause was deafening. People were crying, hugging each other, standing and clapping until their hands hurt. Sophie stood at the podium, soaking it in. This moment of triumph over everything she'd been through. After the conference, there was a reception where Sophie got to meet some of the kids who'd been helped by the Foundation's programs, children from hospitals across the country, who now felt safer because of the changes that had been implemented. They took pictures with her, asked for her autograph, treated her like the hero she was. One little boy, maybe 6 years old, came up to her shyly. I pushed the button in my room yesterday, he said. A nurse came and I told her I didn't like when the cleaning man came in without knocking. She said thank you for telling her, and now he always knocks first. Sophie high-fived him. See, the buttons work. You were brave. Keanu watched from a distance, letting Sophie have her moment. David joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. How does it feel? David asked. Knowing you changed the world for these kids? I didn't change the world, Keanu said. I just did what anyone should do when a child asks for help. But most people wouldn't have. Most people would have assumed it was a nightmare or a misunderstanding. You took it seriously. Keanu thought about that first day in the hospital, about Sophie's whispered words, about the look in her eyes when she'd finally been brave enough to share her terrible secret. She took a chance on me, he said. The least I could do was take her seriously. Over the next few years, the Sophie's Voice Foundation grew beyond anything Keanu had imagined. They funded security upgrades in over 600 hospitals. They created training programs that taught medical professionals how to recognize signs of abuse and how to create environments where children felt safe speaking up. They established a 24-hour helpline where kids could call if they felt unsafe in any medical setting. Most importantly, they changed the conversation. Child patients were no longer just passive recipients of care. They were active participants in their own safety, with rights and voices that deserved to be heard and respected. Sophie grew up to be exactly the kind of person you'd expect from someone who'd been through what she experienced. She became a child psychologist, specializing in helping young people who'd survived trauma. She wrote books about the importance of believing children and creating safe spaces for them to share difficult truths. And every year on the anniversary of the day she'd whispered her secret to Keanu, she returned to St. Mary's Hospital to ring the bell in the pediatric ward, a tradition she'd started. But instead of ringing it for completing her own cancer treatment, she rang it in honor of every child who'd found the courage to speak up when something was wrong. Keanu always attended those ceremonies, standing quietly in the back while Sophie spoke to the current patients about bravery, about using their voices, about how one person speaking the truth could change everything. At the 10th anniversary ceremony, a reporter finally caught up with Keanu and asked the question he'd been asked 1,000 times before. Why did you believe her when no one else did? Keanu looked over at Sophie, now 15 years old and graduating early from high school so she could start college and pursue her dream of helping other children. She was laughing with some of the younger patients, showing them the scar from her old IV line. Proof that she'd been where they were and had made it through to the other side. Because children don't lie about being scared, Keanu said simply, and because the cost of not believing her was too high. If I'd dismissed her concerns and something had happened, I could never have lived with myself. But you risked your reputation, your career, everything on the word of a 5-year-old. No, Keanu corrected. I chose to protect a child who needed protection. There's no risk in doing the right thing. There's only risk in doing nothing. As the reporter walked away to file his story, David approached with a smile, still humble after all these years. I'm serious, Keanu said. Anyone could have done what I did. They just had to listen. But you did listen. And because you did, 29 children who might have been hurt are safe. Thousands of hospitals are safer places. An entire generation of kids knows they have a voice. That's not nothing, my friend. That's everything. Sophie finished talking to the children and walked over to Keanu. She was nearly as tall as him now, confident and poised in a way that 5-year-old Sophie could never have imagined. Thank you for coming, she said, hugging him. These ceremonies mean more when you're here. I wouldn't miss it, Keanu said. I'm proud of you, Sophie. Look at everything you've accomplished. We've accomplished, she corrected. You taught me that one person listening can change everything. Now I'm teaching other people the same thing. As the sun set over Los Angeles that evening, Keanu drove home thinking about how one whispered secret had transformed into a movement. How one moment of choosing to believe had rippled outward, creating waves of change that were still spreading. He thought about all the children who were safer now because Sophie had been brave enough to speak, and he'd been wise enough to listen. He thought about the families who'd found justice, the hospitals that had improved their practices, the lives that had been saved, and he thought about the simple truth that had started it all. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is take a child seriously when they tell you they're afraid, because you never know when that one act of belief might save a life or change the world.